Welcome back to the final video in the summary of Ancient Mesopotamia, Portrait of a Dead Civilization. This is episode 26, and we are looking at crafting materials and general practice, sort of a large overview of the use of domesticated plants and animals, and some metallurgy and building constructions. So it's a fitting end to our series by A. Leo Oppenheim on ancient Mesopotamia and introduction. So we're going to look at gardens versus fields, domesticated plants and animals, tanning and weaving, just very general things about them, metallurgy, and then finally some of the building practices that are found in Mesopotamia. So gardens. Gardens were the earliest form of plant care and growing. They were obviously smaller when compared to fields, and the plants that were grown in the gardens were those that required constant care, which makes sense. Of course, yields were smaller, and but these plants could be prepared, generally speaking, quickly. It didn't require extensive work to either cultivate or to harvest. Fields, on the other hand, were larger. They produced significant yields, and they did not require constant care, but seasonally there was an intensive amount of work that required a great deal of manpower, but again produced significant yields that could be stored. And these, both gardens and fields, were used in Mesopotamia to varying degrees in various places. Some of the primary domesticated plants and animals are discussed by Oppenheim. One is the date palm. One of the issues that you find in Mesopotamia, particularly in the south, is that the water that is used is often brackish. So the plants that grow, those that are more resistant, have a greater tolerance for brackish or salty water, obviously do better. So the primary fruit of the region is the date palm. It has a high tolerance to brackish water. It required little maintenance, and it had a great number of uses given the byproducts of the plant. And so it could be used to craft a number of different items. Barley was a staple product. Again, it had a high tolerance to brackish water. The seeding and the plowing process was eventually mechanized by the use of the cedar plow. This was a great invention in the area and allowed for much longer fields to be plowed and seeded, given that the plow did not have to be turned as often on a long field. It could be pulled by cattle. There was a tube that was used to drop the seeds in as the plowing process went, so it was much faster, much more efficient, and of course required a great deal of manpower to plant and to harvest, but the yields became much greater. The domesticated animals that required no special care in the region were those like the dog, the donkey, the duck and the goose, and the pig. Of course, those animals that required special care, particularly for their products, were goats, sheep, and dairy cattle. Two particular crafts that he discusses at length are tanning and weaving. Essentially, neither technology appears to have fully developed in Mesopotamia when you compare it to the West. So, for example, in tanning, the Mesopotamian process used far more oils and fats than were necessary, and so the development was not as sophisticated as was found in the West. Oppenheim discusses metallurgy and notes that it is difficult to generate enough heat in Mesopotamia during this period to reach the temperatures necessary to practice metallurgy effectively. In addition, when trying to gather evidence for metallurgical practices in the region, it's difficult given that our sources or physical evidence is relatively scarce, given that these materials were often reused by those that came after. So he talks a little bit about iron. Iron ore can be reduced at a lower temperature than copper. However, casting iron requires a higher temperature, often than was able to be generated. But it was still utilized because iron can be hammered out while it's hot, just at a lower temperature. He finishes up the chapter by discussing some of the building practices, particularly using mud. So walls were originally constructed in a Pisé style, so this sort of rammed earth, layering. Later, mud bricks were formed in frames and dried, but mortar was not generally used between the bricks. Instead, they smeared mud, spread it along the sides of the wall. Unfortunately, by doing this, it restricts the height and the stability of the wall. In summation, many of the materials that were used in daily life for sustenance and crafting came from domesticated plants and animals. The arts of tanning and weaving, while used and developed in Mesopotamia, did not gain the level of advancement as was found in the West. Metallurgy was practiced, but did not reach advanced levels, as with tanning and weaving. And then finally, eventually, mud brick became the primary means of construction in Mesopotamia. So that's it. In our next Daily Data series, we will be looking at sex and eroticism in Mesopotamia. Until next time, resist poor scholarship. Always ask, how do you know that?